February 14th, 2007. Valentine's Day. Stephen Grant calls police to report his wife Tara missing for 5 days. His story? She got into a mysterious dark car after saying, "I'll meet you at the end of the driveway." But here's what Stephen didn't tell them. While he was playing the grieving husband on TV, begging for his wife's safe return, part of her was already rotting in their family garage. 3 weeks later, when police finally searched their home, they discovered something so horrific that seasoned investigators couldn't believe what they were seeing. A dismembered human torso, wrapped in plastic, sitting right next to the children's toy bin. What drove a stay-at-home dad to butcher his successful wife? And how long had he been planning this, while kissing their children goodnight? This is the story of Tara Grant, and the red flags that scream when a man's ego becomes deadlier than love. From the outside, Tara and Stephen Grant looked like the perfect modern couple. She was the high-powered executive with a business degree from Michigan State University, climbing the corporate ladder at Washington Group International's Detroit office. He was the devoted husband and father, managing their beautiful home in Washington Township while caring for their 2 young children. Tara's career trajectory was everything ambitious young women dream of. Her role as a business consultant required frequent travel, jetting off to the company's Puerto Rico office where she handled high-stakes projects for the Boise-based international firm. She was smart, driven, and ascending rapidly in a competitive corporate world that didn't always welcome women at the top. Stephen had once harbored his own professional ambitions. He dreamed of a career in politics, envisioning himself as someone who would make a difference in the public arena. But reality had other plans. While Tara's star rose, Stephen found himself working at a tool and die shop. Honest work, but far from the influential political career he'd once imagined. By 2007, their role reversal was complete. Tara had become the primary breadwinner, her salary supporting their upscale lifestyle, the nice house, new cars, private school for the children. Stephen had evolved into what he called Mr. Mom, managing soccer practices, school pickups, and household routines, while Tara conquered corporate America. To their neighbors and friends, this arrangement seemed progressive and practical. Stephen appeared to embrace his role as the involved father, present for every school event and children's activity. He seemed proud when discussing Tara's professional achievements, playing the supportive husband who understood that sometimes sacrifices were necessary for the family's financial security. But beneath this modern marriage facade, something toxic was growing. The first red flags were subtle, moments of tension that could be easily dismissed as normal marital stress. Stephen's comments about Tara's travel schedule carried an edge that went beyond missing his wife. When she returned from business trips, there was a coolness in his demeanor that suggested he viewed her absence as abandonment rather than professional obligation. Friends occasionally noticed Stephen's reactions when Tara discussed her work achievements. While he smiled and nodded appropriately, there was something uncomfortable in his body language, a tightness around his eyes that suggested her success wasn't entirely welcome. The most telling red flag was Stephen's growing resentment of Tara's independence. Her frequent trips to Puerto Rico weren't just about missing family time. They represented everything Stephen wasn't achieving in his own life. Every business trip highlighted the gap between his abandoned political ambitions and his current reality as a stay-at-home parent in suburban Michigan. What looked like a partnership was actually breeding ground for something far more dangerous. A man's wounded ego watching his wife soar while he remained grounded, and the toxic resentment that would eventually turn deadly. The power couple's facade was perfect, but Stephen Grant was already planning how to destroy it. Instead of addressing his feelings constructively, Stephen sought validation elsewhere. The family had hired Verena Dierkes, a 19-year-old au pair from Germany, to help with childcare while Tara traveled. For Stephen, Verena represented everything he was missing: youth, admiration, and someone who saw him as an authority figure rather than a man whose wife out-earned him. The affair began gradually. Initially, their conversations were innocent. Stephen was simply the only adult in the house when Tara was away on business. But those conversations quickly turned sexual as Stephen confided in Verena about his marital frustrations. He told her explicitly that he wanted to sleep with her, crossing every boundary of appropriate employer behavior. The affair escalated rapidly. Within weeks, Stephen was involved in a full sexual relationship with the teenager living under his roof, caring for his children. For Stephen, Verena provided the ego boost his wounded masculinity desperately craved. Here was someone who looked up to him, who made him feel desired and powerful again. Meanwhile, Tara's business trips to Puerto Rico were becoming more frequent, but Stephen's paranoid mind began twisting Tara's professional success into something sinister. He convinced himself that her frequent travel and obvious enjoyment of her work could only mean one thing. She was having an affair with her boss. This paranoid suspicion consumed Stephen's thoughts. He began scrutinizing Tara's behavior for evidence of infidelity, analyzing her work emails, and questioning her explanations about business meetings. In his distorted thinking, Tara's passion for her career became proof of passion for another man. The irony was staggering. While Stephen was actively cheating with their teenage au pair, he was consumed with jealousy over an affair that existed only in his imagination. His guilty conscience projected his own betrayal onto Tara, creating a narrative where she was the unfaithful spouse. Stephen found what he thought was evidence on Tara's computer, traces of communication with a previous romantic relationship that appeared to have been rekindled. Whether this was innocent reconnection with an old friend or something more, Stephen interpreted it as confirmation of his worst suspicions. The foundation of their marriage was cracking under the weight of Stephen's insecurity, infidelity, and paranoia. He could no longer see Tara as his successful partner. She had become his competitor, his threat, and in his twisted mind, his enemy. The man who should have been proud of his wife's achievements was instead plotting her destruction. February 14th, 2007. Valentine's Day. While couples across America exchanged flowers and chocolates, Stephen Grant was at the Macomb County Sheriff's Office spinning the lie of his life. After 5 days of silence, Stephen finally reported his wife missing. His explanation was carefully crafted. On the evening of February 9th, he'd overheard Tara on a phone call saying, "I'll meet you at the end of the driveway." According to Stephen, she then got into a dark-colored car and drove away, disappearing into the night. Stephen's story painted him as the confused, concerned husband. He claimed this wasn't unusual behavior for Tara. She'd left before during arguments. That's why he hadn't immediately contacted police. He was just giving her space to cool off, expecting her to return when she was ready. But Detective Sergeant Pam McLean and Brian Kozlowski immediately sensed something was wrong. Stephen's demeanor didn't match his words. He was nervous, fidgety, trying too hard to appear cooperative while clearly withholding information. Stephen launched himself into the role of grieving husband with theatrical precision. He made numerous media appearances, standing in front of cameras with practiced desperation, begging for Tara's safe return. "I hope she walks in that door right there," he told reporters. "If not, I hope I get myself has 10 messages from her." The performance was Oscar-worthy. "Please call anybody, call the police, call me, call somebody," he pleaded during televised appeals. "If you see her, tell me please." The words were right, but something felt manufactured about his delivery. Behind the scenes, Stephen's behavior told a different story. While publicly begging for Tara's return, he was privately becoming less cooperative with investigators. The more questions detectives asked, the more nervous he became. His initial willingness to help quickly transformed into defensive hostility. Stephen refused to take a polygraph test administered by police, though he later took a private one that came back inconclusive. He began demanding that all communication go through an attorney, despite publicly claiming he wanted nothing more than to find his wife. Detective McLean and her partner established surveillance on Stephen, instinctively knowing something wasn't right. Their training told them that Stephen's story contained too many convenient explanations, and his behavior showed classic signs of deception. The day after reporting Tara missing, Stephen was arrested for driving with a suspended license. He immediately accused police of harassment, claiming they were using the traffic violation as an excuse to question him further about Tara's disappearance. His paranoid reaction revealed a man who knew he was being watched. While Stephen continued his media campaign, detectives were quietly unraveling his story. They confirmed Tara wasn't in Puerto Rico, hadn't used her passport, hadn't touched her credit cards. Her cell phone record showed her last call was made days before Stephen claimed she disappeared. 3 weeks after Tara supposedly drove away in a mysterious dark car, investigators had built enough evidence to obtain a search warrant for the Grant home. Stephen's carefully constructed performance was about to face its ultimate test. March 2nd, 2007. After 3 weeks of Stephen's theatrical performances and evasive behavior, detectives arrived at the Grant family home with a search warrant. Stephen was present when they knocked, still playing the cooperative husband who wanted nothing more than to find his missing wife. As investigators began their methodical examination of the house, Stephen made a casual request that would seal his fate. He asked if he could take the family dog for a walk. The officers, not yet having found anything incriminating, agreed. Stephen was free to leave. He wasn't being detained. Stephen walked out into the cold Michigan winter night and vanished. Inside the garage, Detective McLean's partner noticed something that didn't belong. A plastic storage bin sat in the corner, looking slightly out of place among the typical garage clutter. When he opened it, the smell hit him first. Then he saw the layers of black plastic bags packed inside. As he carefully cut through the plastic, the horrific truth emerged. Inside was a human torso, clothed in a bra, panties, and part of a pair of slacks. The remains were positioned face up, extending from the neck to the top of the thighs. It was what was left of Tara Grant. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation team. This wasn't just a murder. This was dismemberment, mutilation, desecration of a human body. The successful businesswoman, who had once commanded corporate boardrooms, was now reduced to body parts hidden in plastic bags. The garage bin sat grotesquely close to the children's toys, a detail that emphasized the depravity of Stephen's actions. While his kids played just feet away, their mother's torso had been rotting in storage containers. Detective McLean's first thought was professional satisfaction. We got him. But that was quickly replaced by the urgent realization that Stephen had fled and was now a dangerous fugitive. The FBI immediately joined the manhunt, creating a statewide dragnet to capture Stephen Grant. Law enforcement agencies across Michigan were alerted that they were hunting a man capable of murdering and dismembering his wife while maintaining a facade of innocence for weeks. Stephen had bought himself time with his dog-walking ruse, but he hadn't bought himself freedom. His flight was proof of guilt. Innocent men don't run when police find evidence at their homes. His 3-week performance as the grieving husband was revealed as one of the most calculated deceptions in Michigan criminal history. The manhunt intensified as investigators realized they were dealing with someone far more dangerous than initially suspected. Stephen hadn't just killed Tara in a moment of rage. He had systematically dismembered her body and hidden the evidence while sleeping in the same house as his children. As police processed the horrific crime scene, Stephen Grant was somewhere in the Michigan wilderness, armed with more than just desperation. He had purchased a toy gun, alcohol, pills, and razor blades. Whether he planned to go out in a blaze of glory or take his own life, one thing was certain. Stephen Grant knew his carefully constructed lies had finally collapsed. The House of Horrors had revealed its secrets, and now the state of Michigan was hunting a killer who had fooled everyone for 3 weeks while his victim's body decomposed in his garage. After fleeing the search of his home, Stephen Grant embarked on a meandering journey across Michigan, eventually ending up at Wilderness State Park, a place where he and Tara had once camped together. The irony wasn't lost on investigators. The man who had destroyed his wife sought refuge in a location that held memories of their happier times. This wasn't the spontaneous flight of a panicked killer. This was a calculated suicide mission. After spending a freezing night in the wilderness without proper clothing, Stephen was found unconscious under a tree, suffering from severe hypothermia. He was semi-conscious, hallucinating, talking to trees, his body and mind broken by exposure and guilt. When Macomb County detectives McLean and Koslowski arrived at Northern Michigan Hospital, they found Stephen in critical condition but surprisingly willing to talk. What emerged from his confession would shock even seasoned investigators who thought they'd seen everything. Stephen's account of February 9th was chillingly detailed. The argument began in their bedroom as Tara unpacked from her Puerto Rico trip. Stephen was naked, getting ready for bed, when the confrontation escalated over Tara's work schedule and his accusations of infidelity. The violence erupted when Tara slapped Stephen across the face. He retaliated by hitting her, causing her to fall and strike her head on the floor. As she threatened to take the children and leave him homeless, Stephen's rage reached its peak. "I grabbed her neck," Stephen confessed. "She finally grabbed my hand at one point, but it was too late. I couldn't stop." The murder was brutally intimate. As Stephen strangled his wife, she looked directly into his eyes, fighting for her life. Unable to face what he was doing, Stephen covered her face with clothing so he wouldn't have to see her die. After more than 4 minutes of choking the life out of Tara, she was dead. With their children sleeping just feet away, Stephen wrapped a brown leather belt around Tara's neck and used it to drag her naked body down the stairs to the garage. The sound of her body hitting the concrete, he told detectives, was like dropping a watermelon. But Stephen's confession revealed even more disturbing details. He admitted to his affair with Verena, the teenage au pair, confirming investigators' suspicions about the household's toxic dynamics. When Verena returned home that night, Stephen had already hidden Tara's body and spun his story about their argument. The dismemberment occurred the next day at his father's tool and dye shop. Stephen described in horrific detail how he laid out tarps, removed Tara's body from her SUV, and systematically cut her apart. "I cut Tara's hands off, and I cut to the next joint and the next joint, and same with her legs," he confessed, admitting he vomited multiple times during the process. Stephen's account of disposing of the body parts was equally disturbing. He had taken Tara's remains to Stony Creek Park on a child's sled, which careened out of control down a hill, spilling body parts across the snow. When he learned police planned to search the park, he retrieved Tara's torso and moved it multiple times before finally hiding it in their garage. Throughout his confession, Stephen showed no remorse. He described the murder and dismemberment as if telling a story, occasionally laughing or joking with detectives. His only concern was getting caught, not the horror of what he had done to his wife and the mother of his children. The wilderness had broken Stephen's body, but his confession revealed that his soul had been shattered long before that frozen night in the park. Immediately after killing Tara, Stephen began executing his cover-up plan. He started calling her cell phone, leaving concerned voicemails knowing she would never answer. These calls weren't emotional outbursts. They were evidence creation, building a timeline that would support his eventual missing person report. The performance continued for days. Stephen told the au pair Verena that he and Tara had fought and she'd left him, playing the abandoned husband card to gain sympathy. He maintained normal routines with his children, dropping them off at school and attending their activities while his wife's body decomposed in their garage. When Stephen finally reported Tara missing on Valentine's Day, he had spent 5 days rehearsing his story and perfecting his victim persona. His media appearances weren't desperate pleas from a worried husband. They were calculated performances designed to deflect suspicion while he was literally sitting on the evidence. 9 months after his arrest, Stephen's case went to trial. The evidence against him was overwhelming. His own detailed confession, the dismembered remains, the tissue still clinging to saw blades recovered from the crime scenes. His defense had no credible explanation for any of it. On December 21st, 2007, Stephen Grant was found guilty of second-degree murder and mutilation of a corpse. The jury rejected first-degree murder charges, apparently believing the killing wasn't premeditated despite the methodical cover-up that followed. Judge Diane Druzinski sentenced Stephen to 50 to 80 years in prison on February 21st, 2008. The sentence reflected both the brutality of the crime and Stephen's complete lack of remorse throughout the proceedings. Stephen's appeals were methodically denied. In 2010, the Michigan Supreme Court upheld his conviction, rejecting arguments about pretrial publicity and his hospital confession. In 2015, a federal judge denied his habeas corpus petition, definitively closing Stephen's legal options. The case's aftermath revealed the full extent of Stephen's destruction. His father, William Al Grant, committed suicide in June 2008, unable to cope with his son's actions and the family's destroyed reputation. Tara's children, traumatized by losing their mother and having their father revealed as her killer, went to live with Tara's sister in Ohio. Stephen's methodical planning extended even to his confession strategy. By providing details about Tara's location and the dismemberment process, he likely avoided death penalty consideration, while ensuring he could never be charged with additional crimes related to hiding the body. The calculated killer, who had fooled an entire community for 3 weeks, was finally held accountable. But the damage he inflicted on his children, his family, and Tara's memory would last far longer than his prison sentence. Stephen Grant's story reveals one of the most dangerous red flags in modern relationships. A man whose masculinity is so fragile that his partner's success becomes a threat to his very identity. This isn't just about jealousy or insecurity. This is about men who fundamentally believe that a woman's achievements diminish their own worth. The warning signs were there from the beginning, hidden beneath Stephen's seemingly supportive husband facade. When Tara's career flourished while his political dreams stagnated, Stephen didn't celebrate her victories. He internalized them as his failures. Every promotion she earned, every business trip she took, every corporate achievement she celebrated became evidence of his own inadequacy. This is the psychology of male entitlement, the belief that women exist to elevate men, not to outshine them. Stephen had been conditioned to expect the role of provider, protector, and head of household. When those expectations collided with reality, a successful wife who earned more and traveled for work, his entire sense of self crumbled. Men like Stephen reveal their dangerous thinking through subtle reactions to their partner's independence. Watch for the partner who seems uncomfortable when you discuss work achievements, who makes small comments about your busy schedule, or who finds ways to diminish your professional pride. These aren't innocent observations. They're attempts to re-establish dominance. The role reversal resentment that consumes Stephen is particularly toxic because it's often disguised as practical family decisions. He played Mr. Mom while publicly supporting Tara's career, but privately, he was cataloging every sacrifice he made and every success she enjoyed. In his twisted accounting, her gains were his losses. Stephen's affair with the teenage au pair wasn't just infidelity. It was his attempt to reclaim masculine power. While resenting Tara's professional authority, he sought to exercise sexual authority over someone young and dependent. The affair allowed him to feel dominant again, to be the one with power and control. Perhaps most dangerous was Stephen's paranoid projection of his own betrayal onto Tara. Because he was cheating, he assumed she must be too. Because he was deceiving her, he convinced himself she was deceiving him. This projection gave him permission to escalate his resentment into homicidal rage. The red flags of male entitlement include discomfort with female success, subtle undermining of achievements, resentment over role reversals, paranoid jealousy about professional relationships, and the need to assert dominance through affairs or control tactics. Stephen Grant represents the ultimate evolution of toxic masculinity. A man so threatened by his wife's success that he chose to destroy her rather than celebrate her. His wounded ego couldn't tolerate being married to a woman who out-earned him, out-achieved him, and outgrew him. Tara Grant died because she was successful, independent, and unwilling to make herself smaller to accommodate her husband's insecurity. Her murder serves as a warning about the deadliest red flag of all: men who see women's achievements as personal attacks on their masculinity. The lesson is clear. Any man who can't celebrate your success is already planning your destruction. Trust that instinct when someone's reaction to your achievements feels wrong. Your life may depend on recognizing that wounded male ego can be far more dangerous than love. Stephen Grant killed his wife because she refused to dim her light to make him feel brighter. Don't let anyone convince you that your success is their failure.